good afternoon. My name is María Coronado, and I'm with two amazing co-workers, attorneys at ACLU. In this video, I want to ask Zoila and Joaquin more or less how legal department and organizing, we merge together and try to advocate for the more impacted communities in Las Cruces, Albuquerque, Deming, Silver City, everywhere. So since this administration started, we have been seeing unprecedented changes on federal immigration enforcement policies and practices, including the increasing reliance on state and local agencies for information about non-citizens, unprecedented numbers of people in detention centers, increasing numbers on deportation. We have seen these policies rip families apart, children in cages, racial profiling, no due process. These make it difficult for people seeking asylum to be able to even cross over and have their court date. Also, we have seen state and local agencies have enacted laws that make it so difficult for immigrants, families that travel thousands of miles to seek asylum, to look for a better life for their families and themselves. They look for a safe place to live. And this administration has been so uncared for people like myself, you know, that many, many years ago came over seeking a better life. The ACLU of New Mexico, with an amazing team of attorneys like Zoila, Alvarez, Hernández, and Joaquin Marjon, they are doing a challenging work to change some of the legal challenges that we face as families every single day. It's a challenging job, but like I said, they are amazing. So let me introduce Zoila Alvarez Hernandez. She will talk a little bit about herself, and then Joaquin. Thank you so much for accepting my invitation.
Hi, my name is Zoila Alvarez Hernandez. I am a immigrant rights legal fellow at the ACLU. My fellowship is sponsored through the Corrine Wolf Fellowship at UNM School of Law. I graduated from law school from UNM back in 2018. I have a master's in bilingual education from the College of Ed, and have lived in New Mexico for the last several years. I am very passionate about immigrant rights because I'm an immigrant myself. As a dreamer to DACA to now being a legal permanent resident. And so a lot of this work touches me personally, and you know, I hope to continue this work as this administration hopefully you know, phases out, and if not, you know, we're ready to fight and continue to hold the government accountable to honor immigrant rights and civil due process.
Thank you, Soyla. Joaquin?
Thank you, Maria, and thank you, Zoila. My name is Joaquin Marjon. I'm from here in New Mexico. I was born in Taos, and I'm from a family of immigrants. On my grandmother's side, they were from Mexico, and on my dad's side, my family was from Montenegro. I guess I went to law school, studied political science and economics. I was fascinated kind of by power structures and the like. I went to law school, and there I was very intrigued by the ACLU. I was the president of our chapter there for 2 terms. Left that to do public defense work. I wanted my trial badges, and as well, the only thing I could think to do is really be on the front lines of the fight against the state. I practiced in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and Rio Arriba for probably about 3 years as a public defender before I started my own firm, where I continued to do public defense work, but I incorporated a civil rights arm to my practice. The main focus for that being is as a public defender, you're constantly on the defense. You would see these things that these officers would do would be horrible, and the best thing I could possibly get from my client is a lack of conviction. But even to do that, I wasn't allowed to throw punches. And as a public defender, I'm never allowed to sue back. One of the things that I found beneficial about having my own firm is I was able to sue while my client was being prosecuted, which would give me more leverage in order to be able to get an equitable outcome. Following this, I went to Minnesota following my wife. She matched there for her residence, so I had to close down my shop and uproot. I spent the 5 years there doing felony defense in Minnesota. The dynamic was much different. I, being from New Mexico, was very used to my type of immigrants that I knew. The immigration situation in Minnesota was much different. You had a heavy Somalia population, Ethiopian and Sudan, former refugee statuses. Also, the culture was far different, and I felt like I was somewhat sheltered from New Mexico to kind of see the hard lines drawn in the sand that there are elsewhere around the country between race. And it was really an eye-opener to go to Minnesota and practice in a legal system that was a little bit different, as opposed to majority state, a state that is much more Caucasian, and particularly where I was practicing more like a farm town situation. Then I got to come back to New Mexico and basically have the best of all worlds, because now I am able to sue and try to attack the state and protect those who are needing protection, which in my experience, the government always seems to exploit those that are most vulnerable. And immigrants and people of color are always the ones who you see that bear the burden of the policies that we have, and you see them first. So being the administration we have and the ongoing attacks, being in a position where I'm ready to fight back, and particularly expecting the best or the worst out of this election, we're ready to go and try to do what we can to stop the onslaught of this immigration machine that Trump has put forward.
Thank you, Joaquin. I told you, they are an amazing attorneys that we are lucky at ACLU of New Mexico. Tell me, what is the difference, you, Joaquin, that you were talking, that you have, some experience in other states, the difference between maybe what the expectations are in the court, in the legal system in courts. I was talking this morning with a friend, and she was telling me that sometimes the New Mexico courts are a little bit slow. Do you see the same problems in Minnesota in regards to immigration? I mean.
Oh, with regards to immigration, so in both realms, when I was practicing, I dealt primarily on the criminal side. So the speed at which immigration cases were proceeding forward, I was kind of not privy to. I do know that each state has their own kind of flavor. Minnesota is one that was very heavy on kind of limiting one's defenses, and then heavy on conviction, which is and then rehabilitation. So for most people, let's say you're a citizen, that's fine, that's fantastic. Like if you can get probation and get rehabilitation, that's fine. But just the way the system was set up, to get not a conviction or to get some way that you would avoid that conviction was impossible. And for many immigrants, that's death. The conviction is not the issue. It was not the underlying problem. It was the consequences that'll follow. And I guess the lack of flexibility there I found to be very frustrating. In New Mexico, I felt there to be a bit more flexibility, which allowed me as an attorney to care for my client's interests in a more prudent manner.
Yeah. How about you, Soyla? Do you have any ideas of how we can change the Trump machine in regards to deportations?
I think in general, his attack on legal immigration has been really difficult. With immigrants inside the United States who've been here for, I believe, 2 years, they get a higher level of due process when interacting with ICE. But I think that the difference in this administration has been its prioritizing of who needs to be removed from the country, and instead of being strategic on criminals and on drug lords and, you know, whatever the case might be, he's attacking everyday members of our community for allegedly getting a DUI. You know, so some of these people are being picked up from ICE, from courts by ICE pre-conviction. Mm-hmm. And so it's really sort of a difference in strategy as to who needs to be removed. And the Trump administration's rhetoric has really emboldened ICE. And we've seen a lot of reports of increased use of force in that process. And so Trump's deportation machine isn't just cruel, it's a slippery slope to stripping normal members of our community of their own civil rights, because even when one simple individual is impacted, a lot of times they have a child who is a U.S. citizen or a family member, like a spouse who relies on them for emotional support, financial support, companionship, and it's really having a rippled effect for something as low priority, given limited resources, as a DUI arrest pre-conviction.
Thank you. Joaquin, can you tell us a little bit about cases that you make that might keep you awake at night, and why? And what are the cases that mostly ACLU will take? You are mute.
Thank you. And I thought about this, and the cases that keep me up at night, of course, first and foremost, is whatever case is currently pending. But that is just, you know, the fear that you've always overlooked something, and as an attorney, I don't think you ever do get a good night's sleep. There's cases that I feel like that keep me up, that are cases that take with me, are for sure cases in which I know people are still sitting in prison as I sit here. There's always something very weird about that moment when you part ways with somebody that you spent quite a bit of time, and know that he's not going to see daylight for quite some time in any meaningful manner. I remember there was a particular one. There was he was a son from immigrants, and he was a aspiring artist who was a musician who was doing rap music, and he got busted with a bunch of drugs. They did a raid on his house, and where I was at, it was frequent for the officers to do full-blown SWAT team raids after finding residues of marijuana in someone's trash can. And they would, of course, target, in my personal opinion, I don't have the records to prove it, but they would target minorities and those that found to, you know, not fit the mold of how they wanted their community to appear. And this gentleman was a rapper and talked about things that rappers do these days. And he was, you know, 19 years old, very young man. They busted him with sellable amounts of drugs. However, I have dealt with plenty of other people who have had horrible crimes, and this young man had never had anything prior, never had anything since, went through all sentencing, pled guilty, and unfortunately the judge, despite my pleas, did give him a sentence and not a departure, which would be probation. It was not something I was expecting, because and I realized halfway through that it was coming. I started, you know, begging and pleading. But he did get sent. I remember saying goodbye to him. The mother was crying in the back, and they wouldn't let them hug. I had to carry the mom out. And those things will last with me. Now, every one of these people that keeps me up, I kind of have a memory in my head of when they get out. And so I can kind of give myself a release valve if they do.
Thank you. Soyla, what type of cases did ACLU will consider taking?
I think specifically in my fellowship, and I'll let Joachim speak to a little bit of this for his litigation, but we really try to create systemic change, and we try to make sure that it's not about a single individual, but that it will have a positive ripple effect in the community. Sometimes by, raising awareness and building capacity within law enforcement agencies in our state that violated an individual's rights, that didn't necessarily mean, that didn't necessarily know that they would be held accountable. That, stopping a dad with his 5-year-old son in the car is inappropriate, and then holding them for an extended period of time so that ICE can come by and check their immigration status is unlawful and will get you sued. That sends a message to local law enforcement that they really have to be respecting all people's rights, because just because an individual probably had an accident and was a person of color, they were automatically profiled as somebody who might have a questionable immigration status, which is not the job of local law enforcement. State local law enforcement has no business enforcing federal immigration law. That is the Fed's job. That they have a whole budget for that. We don't need to allocate state resources and time and monies to separating New Mexican families. And so we really do try to focus on cases that we do and investigative intakes that we take on to that agenda of, holding the government accountable for its actions. And if it's necessary for them to, put on a training so that they teach their law enforcement officers what's allowable and what isn't, then so be it. If it's a redrafting of their policies, then we can do that too. I think a lot of it is just letting them know that we're watching and we're paying attention.
And thank you for bringing that up. We also at ACLU, we do the Know Your Rights presentations, okay, for the community, also for agencies. There is very important, like Zoila was saying, we need to know our rights. And at the end of the video, I'm going to add always our webpage and some other resources that you will find in our webpage. And talking a little bit more about what Zoila was saying, Joaquin, why do you think it's important to stop this administration and the way that they are not following the rule of law? What needs to happen apart from going to vote? What needs to happen? Because I think that Zoila brought a very important point that they need to retrain the law enforcement agencies. What do you think about? Do you think that will be possible? What else? What other change we need to see in this administration, and not only in this administration, but future administrations?
Thank you. So to start off with this administration, I think we need to be realistic about what we could say our goals are. And I think the revamping and trying to move forward in a positive direction does not seem to be this administration's goal, or do they seem like they are very open to the idea of discussing terms of that. So that being said, we're dealing with outright hostility. And when we're dealing with outright hostility, the options are limited. And those are, in essence, to document and to fight and to preserve the ability to fight back in order to change laws. So we're moving through a different mechanism now. So the policy mechanism would be to lobby, maybe to say that we want them to have better training and the like. If we realize that's going to be a dead end on the federal level, the next method has to be through the courts. to the courts and through at least getting the information out to the people so it can affect their vote. And I think everybody, if you're a decent human being inside, you see kids in cages, it does invoke something in you, and it should. Getting these types of images and stories out to the public so they know what's happening under their dollar. Their taxes are paying for this. I think that is what we can do now. As we move into the future, what I would personally like to see is a revamping of these law enforcement agencies. I've seen time and time again that you have what in essence is a culture that becomes ingrained into individual agencies. Mm-hmm. So by saying you're going to do additional training and set different protocols, it doesn't matter. The underlying structure is going to stay the same if that is the culture of it. The only real way to do this is to completely kind of scramble everything. In other words, the department shouldn't have the same people. If you're working with Jeff and Joe last week, you should not work with Jeff and Joe again. You should go back through training. You should go through your whole academy training, and everybody should be better trained. There should be a lot more money spent on training so that, in essence, right and wrong can be determined. I think one of the big issues we see with law enforcement is the lack of tools they have other than force. They're not taught how to deal with something in a bright manner. So how are we supposed to expect them to deal with something in a bright manner? And as a result, we see damages happen to both sides.
Yeah, I agree. I think some of the things that are the most egregious by this administration has been its attacks on legal immigration. You know, he really said, I'm going to take a hard stance, rule of law, whatever. I mean, this man doesn't even follow the law on basic levels, yet alone immigration. And so his attacks on illegal migration, because asylum is actually a legal form of seeking admission to the United States. That is not the same as people crossing the border that have had previous re-entries, that don't have a credible fear of being persecuted or killed in their country. And he's also really reduced the amount of U visas available. He's eliminated temporary protected status for several countries. I mean, he has really created some major barriers to legal immigration within the United States and its existing system, even in just increasing fees. I mean, they've increased like 50% since he took office. It's something ridiculous. And I think along those lines, it's gonna take more than just a change in administration, because I don't think that any revolutionary change is coming. I think along the lines of what Joaquin was saying is, local people have to get involved with their local government, because our senators, have oversight over ICE and DHS and the amount of money that goes to these agencies. And like Joaquin said, these family separations are happening on our tax dollars. And until we push back and sort of demand accountability, transparency, and accurate reporting, what's taking place, right now during the middle of the pandemic, how outbreaks within immigration detention centers are impacting my local county, and the health outcomes within that in being able to mitigate the damage of this disease, I think are important. And I think engaging the community so that they advocate to their local elected officials that have some oversight on things like DHS and funding will be crucial moving forward.
Yes, definitely. And we are going to have an advocacy training for our volunteers and advocates. And I think Joaquin brought a very good point that we cannot do it ourselves. We need the community. We need every single member involved in helping change some of the rules and some of the laws that we have right now. Thank you. What do you think about ICE using the criminal justice system to funnel people into detention and deportation, into the deportation system?
Any one of us? Or
Yeah, anyone.
do you want to take it first, or should I?
I'll take a quick swing. That is, you know, ICE is going to use whatever tools that they do have available to them, and we can expect that they'll use law enforcement, because local law enforcement agencies, of course, have the biggest net of police contact with individuals. So by virtue of that, it is, if they can use that, it makes it very easy for them to gather information and to have that contact with the person that they're trying to detain. I personally disagree with it. I think one of the main issues that I think you can say that it causes is it creates a divide between immigrants and their ability to access the legal system. If immigrants are afraid that the ICE is going to be contacted and their information is going to be passed along, even if they're the victims of crimes, even if they're the witnesses to crimes, things that really make our society tighter as a whole, they have every incentive of not coming forward and every incentive to hide. So just like we can expect ICE to try to use it if they're given access, we can also expect it to definitely negatively impact our society and our criminal justice system as a whole if they cooperate with ICE.
Yeah, along those lines, it's important that Americans understand that this is a slippery slope to violating everyone's civil rights. And so we've heard of stories where ICE pulled over one individual that, you know, they had a warrant for, but the rest of the people in the vehicle didn't, and they were still detained. And you can't detain somebody without probable cause. You have to have these basic tenets of respect for our Constitution that ICE is just bypassing because you're associated with an immigrant, and that's very problematic. As well as you know, the criminal justice system, it's really prioritizing people over profit over people, and it's creating you know, a private prison complex that will be difficult to hold accountable because it's becoming so powerful and relied on so heavily. I think, you know, some of the atrocities that we've seen within detention centers can be something that can be played into, but the idea that immigration has a factor of moral character, that's fine. But in America, we believe in, you know, people are innocent until proven guilty, and immigrants are not getting that benefit of the doubt, even when they are mixed status families. And that can have huge implications for the financial security of families, emotional securities, you know, any kind of trauma exposure, as well as privacy implications for all Americans.
Thank you.
Oh. All right, so let's hop in here. And kind of following up on what Zoila was saying a minute ago, one of my concerns and why I wanted to be at the ACLU is, particularly in this position, is the rights of all individuals in the United States are always eroded first amongst those who are most vulnerable. We've already seen that by the use of biometric data in order to establish probable cause for the arrest and the detention of individuals. This is data gathered from databases, facial recognition, fingerprint recognition, without oversight of individuals. In essence, put together electronically and determined to have probable cause, which is a standard that we deal with quite a bit in the legal realm. That is the cause that is the standard which allows an officer to make an arrest of you. If we are seeing this at the immigration level, we can only expect that this will move up the ladder and be used against all those located in U.S. citizens and or not in the future, as the precedent is being set as we speak.
Thank you. Thank you, Joaquin and Zoila. So going back to, I think the information that we are talking about is really, really important. So I'm going to go now into what we are living right now, what we are experiencing right now in these troubled times with the pandemic. What do you think about how the government has dealt with the pandemic inside the ICE detention facilities, and why it's important as a community to be informed? Do you think that the reports that we are getting are true? Joaquin?
I guess just first how ICE is dealing with the pandemic. You know, I guess the place to start here is looking at what is happening. There still are people being held, awaiting their hearings. We have detention centers here that had severe outbreaks in New Mexico of COVID-19. And this is really what it comes down to. In my opinion, is ICE is not handling well, or did not handle the pandemic well, in that the reason that the people that they're holding are not criminals. They're being held on a civil detention. Any punishment is considered to be a violation of their constitutional rights to have a due process afforded to them before they're deprived of liberty or punished in any form. ICE basically had the opportunity that they could have released more people to GPS. They could have made this a lot less traumatic for many individuals. By housing people in these dormitories, oftentimes with 50 people in a dorm, people coming in and out, these individuals were aware that they were being put at risk. Mm-hmm. And while many of them did survive COVID after they got it, they weren't aware that they were going to when they got it. And there's a lot to be said about being trapped in a box, knowing that something's coming that's going to potentially hurt and maybe take your life. It is very damaging psychologically. It's not something we should do as a society to people that have not committed a crime and that we're not punishing. So I do think they could have handled it better, and I think they still should handle it better in the future.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think based off reports that we're hearing, we've now just had the 21st death in ICE over the last fiscal year, which is the deadliest fiscal year in 15 years since the agency was created. It's sort of a reflection of the leadership or lack thereof at the highest level in leading the charge to fight COVID-19. There are very specific jail and detention center CDC guidelines with best practices, but fundamentally, those protocols cost money. Those protocols create losses because under the model that we're operating, the more people they have, the more money and profit that they are able to collect. And so, when you hear things like, let's depopulate these immigration detention centers, because like Joachim said, they don't have to be detained. It's probably cheaper for the taxpayers to let them out on parole under GPS monitoring so that these people can adequately socially isolate and quarantine during this pandemic, so that they can avoid, actually having serious complications from it. It's very troubling, but it's also a reflection of our values as a country, mm-hmm. that we're very comfortable in treating human beings as invisible because they are in rural communities where we don't have to deal with what is actually happening in detention centers. We've heard reports, like Joachim said, of 50 people in a pod. That over the weekend, because the hand soap ran out, nobody bothered to refill it. And so they're unable to adequately, wash their hands, which is like basic 101 stuff in prevention. They have a lot of concerns about adequacy of cleanliness and hygiene in having the ability to wash their face masks. It's not like they get a new face mask every day. And so, even just on basic things as like minimizing transfers and trying to minimize the jumping of detainees from one pod to another, to another, to another. I mean, there have been basic things that wouldn't cost ICE a whole lot of money. Information sharing, like, hey, this is what's actually happening, this is the most up to date, so that there isn't a sense of panic within the facility. I think to a certain extent, it's based in cruelty and allowing them to psychologically imagine this demise that they could potentially face when COVID hits their facility. And it's cruel because, you know, I've heard reports of people asking, well, what happens if I get COVID? And COs saying, nothing, we're not going to take you to the hospital. They're overwhelmed. They're not going to take you. And, you know, these people genuinely believe that they're going to die in detention and are never going to get to see their families again. And in New Mexico, given that they are in rural communities surrounded by desert, you know, I've heard an account of one cruel CO saying, oh, we'll just bury you on the facility in the desert. Nobody will be able to tell the difference. That's cruel, you know.
Yeah.
That people are afraid. This is an unknown thing. And the rhetoric from the administration and our president has created the opportunity and gall to say things like that to detainees for people who are under their care, and it's just cruel.
Yeah, it is. And also I think that the carelessness to their own staff, okay, because if they are working and migrants tested positive, they don't care, you know. The people that are getting rich,
yeah, we've seen
detention centers, yeah. So, and one thing that is always puzzle me is that the budget for prisons are higher, more money for prisons than more money for education in a country that we see as one of the, you know, the best country in the world. And we are no longer the best country in the world.
Yeah, we allocate more per person per year on people who are in detention.
Yeah.
And we have heard reports of efforts from the state government here in New Mexico of trying to coordinate testing for COVID, and I being completely unresponsive to it.
Yes.
And I think that kind of leads into something we're talking about is the privatization of the detention system in general. There's no way around that. That is an American industry. It is as American as it gets. We had the automotive industry, we have the tech industry, and we have the human detention industry. One of the things I know Zoila and I have been working heavily on is attacking these private detention centers, the companies that own them. To clarify this, I don't think the state detention centers and the state-run facilities are necessarily outright better because they're state-run. But one of the main concerns I do have is, I came from an economic background. One of my majors in undergrad was economics. And the simple addition of allowing these private detentions to run, allowing the profit off of the basically immobilization and confinement of other human beings creates economic incentives. Without question, our own legislators, whether they be at the state level or the national level, are influenced by this because they are receiving donations. It is in the interest of that industry to make detention longer and prolonged and the conditions less regulated. So as we go forward, we see this in the private detention centers here, where every corner that could be cut is cut. There's a general lack of accountability, and in essence, the bottom line is what drives this. This is an industry which is directly dealing with the profit. The crop that they're growing is human lives, and I think is the opinion of myself that simple influence of having that economic interest in the detention of human beings is leading to massive suffering of the poor and the vulnerable populations that enter this country or who are already here.
Thank you. That was my next question. What do you think about private prisons in New Mexico? So thank you for bringing it up. But
yeah, we actually have a local private detention, MTC, that in the middle of their COVID outbreak this summer, notified the county of their intent to cancel their contract because they did not have enough immigration detainees in the middle of an outbreak for COVID. I mean, the idea that there is zero regard for human lives and safety, and they're just prioritizing profit because they don't have enough heads or bodies in their facility to be profitable is appalling. And under normal circumstances, it should be criminal in the middle of a pandemic. I mean, it's really obscene.
What I see it, and this is my very personal opinion, okay, it's human trafficking, you know, because they are getting money, okay, to lock people up. So very personal opinion. So on the upcoming legislation session, Joaquin, maybe you can help us out here. Do we have any bills that you think are important to our mission at the ACLU, and why is it important to get involved and advocate?
There are going to be a number of bills that are going to be coming up that I think the public needs to know about. The issue is oftentimes the bills that come up that the public needs to know about are bills that we are not introducing. And of course, we to have something we could do proactive to make active change in what we believe is the correct direction for this country and to protect the rights of individuals. More often than not, we spend the legislative session defending against attacks on those same liberties through legislation passed. So we'll have more against the things that we need to be worried about as those get introduced as time comes. In the same vein as what we were just talking about, we are working with a coalition of other groups, and we'll be hopefully introducing a bill that will be to end private detention in New Mexico. This would address both the use of private correctional facilities as well as private detention facilities for which ICE contracts and the feds contract for the marshals to house individuals. There have been a couple other states to pass similar legislation, but we are working on that. We do feel that the gross incompetence of the way that these facilities handled COVID is going to provide momentum to hopefully be able to push this through the session, because these the detention centers for their own profit not only endangered all of the detainees that they were housing, but they endangered the communities that were surrounding them. They endangered their guards. They endangered the staff that made food. Those entire communities were endangered by the recklessness and the negligence of these companies. And we hope that the state legislators recognize this and protect their people and help us ban these detention centers.
Thank you.
I mean, we sent letters at the beginning of the pandemic, warning them that they needed to prepare adequately, and nothing came of it. I mean, we have tried to give them the benefit of the doubt to ensure that they take steps necessary, and they have repeatedly failed.
And thank you. That was one of my next question. Tell me about, the process when you ask for a FOIA or any other, you file different requests. I know it's difficult, okay. How does it impact your work? How long it will take for them to reply or to, I don't know the legal terms.
I think in general, it's one of the great American things, right? Government transparency, and that there are sunshine laws in place to make sure that we're able to ask our government what it's doing. And, it's an essential part of our democracy, which has been chipped away. There is a whole lot of exemptions that are included in that. And a lot of what we do is just to sort of understand what's taking place. On the local state level, we actually receive pretty good cooperation. Sometimes, there are barriers on the amount of documents being requested, which we are always accommodating on. And on the federal level with FOIA, there are insane wait lists. Like I have been waiting for a FOIA on a very specific document, only relevant to the state of New Mexico, since October of last year. I mean, the government on the federal level is more and more increasingly, placing barriers to access federal records. But on a local level, I think there are still a few good champions. We have to push them a little bit too to ensure that we're able to keep those laws on the book, that they're actually functioning to the spirit of the law. And it's something that not just us as the ACLU can do, anybody can do.
Yes.
And really sort of understand what the government has on their name, on their address, how they're operating, the information that they're sharing. And for my project specifically on the entanglement of law enforcement and information sharing with ICE, it's one of the key things that we're using to, as an advocacy tool, to understand what information is being shared and kind of funds that we're accepting from agencies such as the Department of Justice, and what kind of strings are attached to those kinds of funding. And, just to ensure that we are maintaining trust within the community or helping restore it between law enforcement and immigrants so that they can have the same access to justice that's necessary to be a functioning community. But it's an ongoing process. I know Joachim has had some issues with FOIA himself, and we're always ready to jump on and file an IPR lawsuit when people, really push back. Anything you want to share, Joachim?
No, I think you summed it up. I think we have these avenues. They're constantly being under attack. It's like a constant fight that has been a fight since I started the practice, and it'll continue to be a fight until I'm gone, hopefully.
Yeah. Thank you. And going back to the advocacy training, I think that we don't need to only advocate for, with our elected officials, but I also think that we need to bring it to our local officials and not only state or federal, but local too, because we need to have good judges that will help us in this challenging work that you do. What advice would you give to someone starting their career in social justice? Zoila.
Volunteer, engage, read different perspectives. I think I myself am biased in sometimes in what I read and what I consume, and I think that as we move forward, we really need to sort of fight that divisiveness that's taking over our country. And you don't have to agree, but I think that it's important to at least understand the lies that are being spread and call it out when it happens. I think nowadays, even taking a stance and saying Black Lives Matter is a act of social justice. And so I think that one of the first things that we can do is educate ourselves on what policies are and how they disproportionately impact people of color, whether it's access to voting or whether it's access to our elected officials, access to unemployment, access to the CARES Act, because immigrants don't get unemployment. Immigrants didn't have, a stimulus check as a result of the CARES Act.
But we pay taxes.
But we pay taxes. And so it's one of those things that different people have different levels of privilege. And, it's important that we become conscious in that, if I don't have time to volunteer, I'm struggling to get by this pandemic, but I can drive people to the polls. I can make sure my neighbor, or my friend, or my niece registers to vote and exercises their right. I can make sure that we focus on local politics and not just, the president, the presidential election or Senate. I think it's important that people understand that there are very real, actionable steps on the ground that people can take in their communities, even if it's something as simple as switching to a reusable water cup,
Yes.
because I don't see a Green New Deal passing anytime soon, but caring for our earth is part of social justice. And so there's a lot that we can do. Volunteering and translation, if you have any of those language skills, there are small actionable steps. And I think one of the goals of this current administration is to make us feel so overwhelmed by everything that's happening that we feel like, there's just so much, there's nothing I can do. And I'm here to say that's not true. There are very real, small, actionable steps that you can do as you launch your career in social justice, and hopefully volunteering with an organization such as our own or other of any of our amazing partners in the community would be a great start.
But it's true what you're saying, because sometimes we get overwhelmed. I remember starting, volunteering with the Housing Authority when I came 30 plus years ago, and it's always a continued fight, it's always moving, we never stop, we need to keep moving. And the thing for me is the empowerment that we do to the community, okay? To the members, to the volunteers, to whomever wants to, like you said, volunteer, they need to feel empowered to continue their work, because sometimes I feel overwhelmed right now. How about you, Joaquin?
I think it was really hit a bunch of the things that I think are important as well. One of the things my mom always taught me, which I think is not taught me, instilled in me, would be to cling to nothing too tightly so that you have nothing to defend. And I feel like in social justice work, or when I say social justice work, I really mean doing work that you believe is going to make this world a better place. And with that, you need to be flexible, and you need to be able to move, and you need to be able to abandon something you were working on. Look at every situation and every day as it is that day. Don't hold on to anything in the past, and don't get too hopeful for the future. There's no way around it when you're fighting powers that are greater than you as an individual. It can be daunting. I think as Zoila says, with this administration, you get an onslaught that you can't remember what happened Monday that you're upset about that was crushing, because too many things happened by Thursday that you feel, what's the point? Why do I get out of bed? Why do I keep moving? But just like everything, one little bit of improvement a day, one way to make yourself stronger as an advocate in the future, and anything you can do to help the cause out, however small it is what you can do. Don't get down. I think the biggest thing you can do is give up. That's the only way death happens, which whatever career path you take, if you are trying to do the right thing, you are fighting, you are doing it. The only thing that way you stop is when you give up and you stop trying to do the right thing for the world.
Yeah, and it's a passion also. Thank you so much for your time, and we learned a lot. I have learned a lot from you, both of you, and thank you. I'm truly honored to be working side by side with you, with the legal department that is being amazing in these times. And like I said, Cafecito con Pan Dulce es algo muy importante. Vamos a tratar de hacerlo en inglés y en español. Síganos y gracias. Gracias, Zoila. Gracias, Joaquín.